Hi guys! So, we have been reading the Boxcar Children, the cereal box mystery, and we are in the very last chapter of our adventure with the Alden children, okay? So chapter 10 is a special badge for a real detective. That's crazy, Tori Smits cried, pulling against the police officer who were holding her. One of the police officers shook his head. I'm afraid it isn't, Mrs. Smits. We're expecting your partner, Mr. Mapp, to slip the ring to you when you grabbed him this time. We saw it happen. It worked the first time, Mr. Bellows said, but it won't work now. Seeing Mr. Bellows, Mrs. Smits' eyes widened. The other officers led the thief over to the others. His hat was gone, and the handkerchief covering his face had boiled down around his neck. He was a pale man with piercing gray eyes and a thin, pointed chin. Meet Marvin Mapp, the police officer said. I told you it wouldn't work a second time, Marvin, Mrs. Smits gasped. Be quiet, Mr. Mapp ordered. We know you have the ring, Benny said to Mrs. Smits. You should give it back. And the necklace, and the bracelet. It wasn't my idea, said Mrs. Smits. Mr. Mapp gave Mrs. Smits a disgusted look. I don't have the ring, he said. She does. She has the necklace and the bracelet, too. Mrs. Smits and Mr. Mapp glared at one another for a moment. Then Mrs. Smits reached into her pocket, pulled out the ruby ring. She put it into Mr. Bellows' outstretched hand. The necklace and the bracelet are at my house, she said, in the back of the drawer in the basement. Mr. Mapp gave you the necklace and the bracelet when he ran out of the antique shop, didn't he? Jessie asked. Mrs. Smits nodded. I managed to keep the lock on the glass case from snapping shut after Mr. Bellows showed the necklace set to Mr. Darden. That's how Marvin got in and out of the glass so fast. He didn't have time to give me the ring. Mr. Bellows ran up behind me and I saw a police officer coming, so Marvin had to run. When he did, he crashed into the bicycle. I saw him slip the ring into the box of cereal. It should have been safe there, Mr. Mapp growled. I tried to get it back right away, Mrs. Smits went on, but you wouldn't throw away your open box of cereal. Who broke into our house and stole the box of cereal? Benny asked, looking from Mr. Mapp to Mrs. Smits. That was me, Mr. Mapp admitted, but the dog started barking, so I grabbed the cereal and ran. Watch growled softly as if he was remembering what had happened. You left footprints when you knocked over the flower pot, Jessie said. You dumped cereal out by the boxcar, Henry said. Mr. Mapp nodded. It was useless. The ring wasn't in there. I remembered seeing other boxes of cereal when I ran into the bike. I figured I must have gotten the wrong box of cereal. So you came back, saw us with cereal when we were at the boxcar, Violet said. I felt like someone was watching us. She shuddered at the memory. That's why the footprint we found in the stream was so much smaller, Jessie said. You made it. Nodding, Mrs. Smits said, I doubled back to the boxcar, grabbed the cereal, but the ring wasn't in that box either. We figured you hadn't found it yet, or you would have realized what it was and gone to the police. Mr. Mapp said, so I went back that night to check your garbage. He made a disgusting face. Nothing. We didn't know what else to do, Mrs. Smits added, so we started following you. And today you found the ring in the cereal box. But we didn't, Harry said. We found the ring the very first day. You did, Mrs. Smits said. Yes, we didn't know the ruby ring Benny gave to Violet. She was wearing it when we went to visit you at the karate center, Jessie explained. Oh no. You mean this was all a trick? Cried Mrs. Smits. Yes, Henry said. When we realized that we had the ring, and how it got into the cereal box, we set a trap using a new box of cereal and the police. See, Benny said. We did solve a mystery after all. It was a dirty trick, Mr. Mapp shouted. Sneaky! No, it wasn't. Wasn't it sneaky stealing the jewelry from Mr. Bellows, Henry said. That's right, Benny added. You were wrong. Stealing is wrong. Mr. Mapp and Mrs. Smith, my advice to you is that you listen to what Benny said, because it might just keep you out of trouble in the future. Let's go, the officers replied. The police led the two thieves away. I have to go to the police, Mr. Bellows said, to identify the necklace and the bracelet. He took out a small box out of his pocket and carefully put the ring inside. How could I ever thank you? We're glad we could help, Henry said. Mr. Bellows shook hands with Henry, Jessie, Violet, and Sue Lee. But when he got to Benny dropped to his knees. Look, he said. He picked up something from the cereal box that had spilled across the picnic blanket. It was a small silver cardboard star. It's the last star, Benny said happily. Now I can send away for my detective's badge. The next day was Grandfather's birthday, but Violet and Benny had one thing to do before hurrying to get the preparations done for the party. Hurry, Violet said. We haven't got much time. Here's the mailbox, Benny said. He opened it and dropped the envelope inside. He peered through the opening to make sure the letter had gone in. It was addressed to the cereal company. Inside were all the silver stars that Benny needed to get his detective's badge. They walked home quickly from the mailbox to the corner and hurried to the boxcar. Inside, Jessie was spreading the tablecloth across the old table. In the middle of it, she put the vase of flowers that she had picked that day. Outside, Sue Lee was hanging pine cones, glittered and painted, tied with ribbons on a small red maple tree near the boxcar. Benny ran to help her. Violet, you hand me the tape, please, Henry asked. I dropped it. Violet hurried to pick the tape up and handed it to her brother. He taped the corner of the poster above the door, and it said, Happy birthday, Grandfather! At that moment, Mrs. McGregor came out the back door. In her hands, she held a beautiful cake with pink and lavender roses and green leaves made of sugar. On top of the cake were blue candles. This is the best birthday cake I've ever seen, Violet said, clasping her hands together. And the most delicious one you'll ever eat, Mrs. McGregor assured her. Until my next one. Now, who wants to help me bring out the punch? I will, said Benny. He skipped along Mrs. McGregor as she went back into the house. I could lick the frosting bowl for you, he volunteered. Mrs. McGregor laughed. Henry looked at his watch. Cousin Alice and Cousin Joe will be here in 10 minutes, he said. They all worked faster than ever. At last, Violet tied a big bow on the Japanese maple tree. A car pulled into the driveway. Quickly, everyone jumped into the boxcar and pulled the door closed. Peering through the crack, they saw the back door open. That's when they saw Mrs. McGregor gesture towards the boxcar. Do you think he suspects anything? Jessie whispered. Not yet, said Henry. He held on to Benny to keep him from jumping out the boxcar too early. Benny held on to watch. Grandfather, Mrs. McGregor, Alice, and Joe walked toward the boxcar. Now, whispered Henry. Jessie pulled open the boxcar door, and they all leaped out. Surprise, they all shouted, and Watch barked loudly. And then, as Mrs. McGregor, Alice, and Joe joined them, they all began to sing Happy Birthday. Grandfather's mouth dropped open in a big surprise. When everyone had finished singing, he began to laugh. Are you surprised, Grandfather? Benny asked. I sure am, his grandfather answered. He looked at Joe and Alice. Did you know about this? Joe and Alice nodded. Alice said, That's why we invited you to come visit, so there would be time to decorate the boxcar. These are the kids with Grandpa handing him his birthday balloons. Look at that. He was sure surprised. What a nice birthday surprise, right? That'd be great. Benny said, "Do you want some cake? Mrs. McGregor made it. It's your favorite kind." He paused and added, "Mine too." Laughing, everybody went into the boxcar. Grandfather Alden blew out the candles on his cake. He cut it and gave everyone a piece. While Henry and Jessie poured the punch, Violet passed out the napkins. "Let's eat our cake and drink our punch outside under the tree," Jessie said. "Yes," Violet agreed. "I know just the tree." "Come on, Grandfather," Benny said. When they reached the tree, Grandfather said, "Oh, my goodness, another surprise!" "It's a Japanese maple tree," Henry said. "We picked it out ourselves. It's a wonderful tree, and it has some very fine decorations," Grandfather said. "We made those," Sue Lee told him. They sat down in the grass under the new tree and ate their cake and drank their punch. Mrs. McGregor gave Watch a special dog biscuit that she had saved for the birthday celebration. With the sun shining through the red maple, they added colors of rubies all around the yard. So, Violet said, "Not all rubies are red." "Speaking of rubies," said Joe, "Alice and I have something to show you." Alice reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out the latest edition of the Greenfield newspaper. "Your names are on the page 1, she told the Boxcar children. Sure enough, the newspaper had printed the whole story of the stolen jewels and how Henry, Jessie, Violet, Benny, and Sue Lee had helped them find and capture the robbers. The story even mentioned Watch. "We'll have to save this," Henry said. Benny sighed. "What's wrong?" Benny asked Violet. "I wish I had my detective's badge," Benny said. "Then I would have worn it when we solved the case, and I would have been a real detective." Jessie laughed. "Oh, Benny, you don't need a detective's badge to be a real detective. You already are one." "Really?" asked Benny. "Yes," declared Jessie. "Not only are you all real detectives," said Grandfather, looking around, "but you're my favorite detectives in the whole world. You are the very best." "Is that true?" Benny said. "It certainly is, Benny," Grandfather said. "It certainly is." I hope you guys liked that mystery. Let me know if you figured it out before I told you. Okay, see you in the next one. Bye.